On the 19th of February, 2026, Thames Valley Police arrested a 66-year-old man on suspicion of misconduct in public office, a charge carrying a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. The man was Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. It was his birthday. When King Charles III issued a statement that same day, carefully worded and institutionally precise, he referred to the arrested man not as his brother, but by his full legal name, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. 4 words that communicated everything the Crown needed to say. In royal circles, silence is a weapon. The silence around Prince Andrew has been built, piece by piece, over 6 years, with the cold architectural precision that only an institution centuries old knows how to apply. This isn't a story about Jeffrey Epstein, or Virginia Giuffre, or guilt. It's a story about how a monarchy survives a scandal it can't win, by treating one of its own as if he never existed. The palace offered nothing to counter the story. Every absence of a statement was itself a statement. It began on the 16th of November, 2019, in a BBC studio. The Newsnight interview was recorded 2 days earlier inside Buckingham Palace itself, which, depending on who you believe, was either approved by Queen Elizabeth II or a catastrophic failure of internal gatekeeping that nobody at the palace wanted to claim. One of Andrew's own advisors opposed the interview so strenuously they resigned before it aired. Andrew, reportedly, was pleased with how it went. He gave journalist Emily Maitlis and the Newsnight team a tour of the palace afterward. The public reached a different verdict. Andrew had agreed to speak publicly about Jeffrey Epstein for the first time. What emerged was a masterclass in how not to weather a crisis. He offered a Pizza Express alibi, claiming he was at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter Beatrice on the specific evening Virginia Giuffre described, at, I suppose, sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon. He explained he couldn't have sweated on Giuffre, as she alleged, because he had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War, where he had served as a Royal Navy helicopter pilot in 1982. That war service, which Andrew had traded on for decades as a marker of character, became the vehicle by which he tried to explain away a physical impossibility that sounded, to most listeners, exactly what it was. Media observers described the broadcast as a car crash, nuclear explosion level bad, and the worst public relations crisis for the royal family since the death of Princess Diana. Within 4 days, Andrew announced he was stepping back from public duties for the foreseeable future. The organizations moved within the week. Standard Chartered, the bank backing his Pitch at Palace entrepreneur initiative, declined to renew its sponsorship for commercial reasons. KPMG pulled its support. AstraZeneca announced it was reviewing its 3-year partnership. All approximately 60 of Andrew's charity patronages evaporated. By November 24th, the palace had confirmed that 230 patronages would be stepped back, a figure that reflects how aggressively Andrew had cultivated an institutional footprint over the previous 2 decades. What the palace didn't do was defend him. No statement, no contextualization, none of the Duke remains committed to language that royal communications teams deploy reflexively for working royals in difficulty. The Newsnight interview was left to stand, unmediated, as the defining document of who Prince Andrew was. The palace simply waited. That waiting, that deliberate institutional stillness, is the strategy. More than 2 years later, on January 13, 2022, Buckingham Palace issued a statement. Just 49 words. With the Queen's approval and agreement, the Duke of York's military affiliations and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. The Duke of York will continue not to undertake any public duties and is defending this case as a private citizen. Every word chosen with surgical care. Returned to the Queen, not removed from the Duke. a private citizen, not our son or our brother. The statement stripped Andrew of his role as Colonel of the Grenadier Guards and all honorary military titles, several of which he had inherited from Prince Philip. It came the same week a U.S. federal judge refused to dismiss Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit, removing the last legal shield Andrew's team had tried to construct. On February 15, 2022, a joint statement announced that Andrew and Giuffre had reached an out-of-court settlement, which included a donation to Giuffre's charity. The Daily Telegraph estimated the figure at up to £12 million. The Queen reportedly contributed £2 million toward it. The then Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, reportedly loaned Andrew the bulk of the remaining sum, on the condition it be repaid after Andrew sold his Swiss chalet. The palace's response to the settlement was delivered through an official spokesperson. It's a matter for the Duke and his legal team. 11 words. No sympathy for the claimant. No acknowledgement that a member of the royal family had just paid a sum running into 8 figures to resolve allegations of sexual abuse. The palace communicated its position about Andrew with the words it declined to say. Silence functions differently from denial. Denial requires constructing an alternative narrative, one that can be cross-examined, challenged in court, dismantled by a single contradicting piece of evidence. Silence requires nothing. It costs nothing. In a media environment where palace statements carry semi-official weight, the refusal to issue one sends exactly the message the institution intends. This person isn't worth defending. The contrast with other royals is instructive. When Kate, Princess of Wales, underwent abdominal surgery in January 2024, and the nature of her illness became subject to public speculation, Kensington Palace issued multiple statements tracking her recovery, culminating in a personal video message in which Kate confirmed she was undergoing preventive chemotherapy. When allegations of workplace bullying involving Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, surfaced in February 2021, Buckingham Palace publicly confirmed it was reviewing its HR policies and launched a formal investigation. The institution speaks when it chooses to speak. Its silence on Andrew, maintained through 3 years of Epstein document unsealing, a civil settlement, and ultimately a criminal arrest, isn't institutional inertia. It's institutional choice. Valentine Lowe, whose book Courtiers examined palace communications strategy through 25 years of access at the Times, documented how the departures of both Harry, Meghan, and the disgraced Andrew from royal life exposed the degree to which communications teams control narrative by deciding precisely what not to say. Royal expert Duncan Larcombe described Charles's position without euphemism. If they're on a life raft after a shipwreck, Charles isn't going to dive into the water to save his brother. Self-preservation is more important. The architects of the silence had reasons beyond institutional pragmatism. Royal author Robert Jobson detailed an account, from a single source, in which Charles and Andrew had what Jobson described as a massive conversation around 2013 or 2014, in which Andrew gave Charles his complete and utter assurance that he had done nothing wrong regarding Epstein. When the full scale of Andrew's entanglement became undeniable, Charles reportedly felt personally deceived. William's position was documented by multiple sources as more impatient still. He reportedly characterized Andrew as an ignoramus and urged Charles to act against him years before any formal measures came. In William's mind, Andrew should have been removed from the line of succession immediately and cut out of royal life completely, one palace source told reporters. William reportedly challenged his father directly following the Queen's death in September 2022 and was, per one account, very much put in his place. Charles moved at his own pace. The direction of travel was never in question. The Crown's playbook for situations like this is older than any of its current practitioners. When Edward VIII abdicated in December 1936, The institution moved immediately to define the terms of his containment. Letters patent explicitly withheld the style of HRH from Wallis Simpson, the woman for whom he had surrendered the throne, a denial made formal and irrevocable without further act of the Crown. Edward was given the Duchy of Windsor as a financial arrangement, but refused any active public role. Proposals to make him Governor-General of one of the dominions were quietly killed. The Queen Mother's documented hostility toward the couple was never publicly corrected by the palace, as Alexander Larman details in The Crown in Crisis. It was an institutional attitude rendered personal. Edward died in 1972, having spent 36 years as a royal footnote. The palace didn't announce his exile. It simply withdrew from around him until his presence in British royal life became atmospheric rather than actual. But the Duke of Windsor's exile was at least visible. The Crown's darkest application of institutional silence predates his abdication by 5 years and is far less known. In 1941, 2 women, Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon, were quietly placed in a care institution. They were the nieces of the Queen Mother, which made them first cousins of Queen Elizabeth II. Both women had learning disabilities. Neither was publicly visited by their family again. In Burke's Peerage, the authoritative reference to British aristocracy, both Nerissa and Catherine were listed as deceased, while they were alive. Nerissa died in 1986. The truth about Catherine's survival emerged in 1987, when a journalist found her still living in a care home in Surrey. The Queen Mother, who was 87 in 1987 and fully capable of public comment, said nothing. The royal family said nothing. The palace issued no accounting of how 2 members of the extended family had been officially declared dead for decades while breathing. These weren't disgraced royals. They hadn't embarrassed anyone or given damaging interviews. They were women placed out of sight because their existence was inconvenient, then reported as dead in official records, and left there. When that fiction was exposed, the response was silence. Not denial, not explanation. Silence. The institutional logic is identical to what was applied to Andrew. When a member of the family becomes more costly than they are valuable to the Crown's survival, they disappear. The mechanism varies. The calculus doesn't. By mid-2022, Andrew's institutional disappearance was operating at multiple levels simultaneously. He was excluded from the public procession at Garter Day in June 2022, reportedly following direct interventions by Charles and William to prevent him appearing in public view. When Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022, Andrew appeared in civilian clothing at ceremonial events. He was permitted to stand in military uniform for a 15-minute vigil beside her coffin at Westminster Hall on September 16th, an allowance royal observers later described as the last ceremonial grace the institution extended to him. By October 2022, his publicly funded protection was terminated. The 7-figure annual cost of his private security fell entirely to him. By January 2023, he could no longer use his suite of rooms at Buckingham Palace. What remained was Royal Lodge, a 30-room leasehold residence in Windsor Great Park that Andrew had secured on a 75-year lease in 2003 for £1 million, paying minimal rent over 2 decades. He lived there with Sarah Ferguson, his ex-wife since 1996, who had never translated that legal separation into practical distance. Ferguson had spoken publicly in his defense on multiple occasions. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in June 2023 during a routine mammogram, and with skin cancer in January 2024. In March 2023, Charles made his first formal move to extract Andrew from the property, offering Frogmore Cottage, recently vacated by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, as an alternative. Andrew refused to leave. The standoff that followed illustrates precisely how the silent strategy works when the target resists. The institution doesn't argue. It applies financial pressure and waits. In August 2024, Charles cut off Andrew's private security funding and reduced his allowance. Andrew had received a £249,000 annuity from Queen Elizabeth II, already reduced by Charles in April 2023. His income was effectively reduced to a Royal Navy pension of approximately £20,000 per year, plus whatever remained of the trimmed annuity. The Swiss chalet had reportedly been sold to repay Charles the loan from the Giuffre settlement. A man once described by royal observers as Queen Elizabeth's favorite son was funding his own security out of a naval pension. December 2024 added another layer of liability. Reporting emerged that Andrew had cultivated a relationship with Yang Tangbo, a Chinese national subsequently named in a ruling by Britain's High Court as barred from the country on national security grounds. The court found Andrew had forged a relationship of significant degree with Yang, marked by an unusual degree of trust, and that Andrew was prepared to enter into business activities with him. Andrew had invited Yang to his 60th birthday party in 2020. Former palace advisor Dominic Hampshire, speaking about the internal aftermath of the 2019 Newsnight broadcast, described the institutional calculation that had been made. It was very clear internally, within the royal household, that we would have to look at options for the Duke's future away from royal duties. The Yang connection confirmed exactly why those options couldn't include institutional protection. On October 17, 2025, Andrew announced he would cease using the Duke of York title. 13 days later, on October 30th, Buckingham Palace formalized what Andrew had conceded voluntarily, announcing the king had initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of Prince Andrew. The London Gazette published the letter's patent on November 3, 2025. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor would no longer hold the title or attribute of Royal Highness or the titular dignity of Prince. On December 13, 2025, the Ministry of Defense removed his honorary rank of Vice Admiral. He reverted to Commander, retired. The same October statement served formal notice to surrender the lease on Royal Lodge. Andrew vacated on February 2, 2026, relocating to Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, a 5-bedroom farmhouse, from 30 rooms to 5. 17 days later, he was arrested. On his 66th birthday, Thames Valley Police detained Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Charles III issued a statement. I have learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office. What now follows is the full, fair, and proper process by which this issue is investigated in the appropriate manner and by the appropriate authorities. In this, as I have said before, they have our full and wholehearted support and cooperation. He didn't say, my brother. Not once. In roughly 60 words, the King of England acknowledged that a close family member had been arrested without acknowledging the family connection. No, in this difficult time for our family. No reference to a relationship that has existed since the 19th of February 1960, when Andrew Albert Christian Edward was born to Elizabeth II and Prince Philip at Buckingham Palace. Each word was calibrated. Each omission was deliberate. The institution hadn't invented this response under pressure. It had been building toward it for 6 years. Each withdrawal, the patronages, the HRH, the military titles, the Buckingham Palace rooms, the security funding, the allowance, the Royal Lodge lease, was a preparatory step. By the time the arrest came, the palace had nothing left to strip. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor had already been reduced, formally and publicly, to a private citizen with a naval pension and the borrowed farmhouse on a Norfolk estate. Charles's statement wasn't cold in that moment. It was the logical endpoint of a strategy executed in careful increments across years. This is what institutional erasure looks like when it has patience. The Bowes-Lyon cousins vanished in a single administrative act. Signed papers, a care home, a Berks peerage entry that declared them dead. The Duke of Windsor was exiled in the immediate aftermath of the abdication crisis, cut off within months. Andrew's removal took 6 years, required multiple formal instruments of Crown law, and was applied incrementally. Each step calibrated to appear proportionate rather than premeditated. The destination was always the same. What Charles III's monarchy is communicating, not with statements, not with press conferences, but with the architecture of its silence, is that the Crown's survival outweighs its family obligations. The slimmed-down monarchy he championed before his accession has always carried an implicit corollary. Royals who don't serve the institution's purpose don't remain within it. Andrew's case is the most complete demonstration of that principle in living memory. No precedent, not the Duke of Windsor, not the Bowes-Lyon cousins, produced a removal this total, this formally documented, this publicly visible at every stage, and this finally reducible to a king issuing a statement about his brother's arrest without using the word brother. The palace didn't need to say more. It already said everything. Subscribe for more stories like this one.